What's the most frightening game ever made is a pretty common question amongst gamers. I hate hearing the answers to this question, because it's always games like id's Doom 3, Monolith's Fear and Condemned, and Capcom's Resident Evil series that usually come up as answers. These games and myriad other so-called horror games all rely on their ability to startle the player. A startle reaction is a sudden shock of surprise or alarm. Walking up behind someone and shouting "Boo!" is exactly what those games do. It's cheap, it's easy, it's derivative, and worst of all, it's nothing to do with fear. Fear is a distressing emotion, and manipulating your emotions is what the Silent Hill series is all about. Just like the original, Silent Hill 2 uses images and sounds that assault your senses in an incredibly powerful and effective way. Dogs jumping through windows and zombies bursting out of closets are amusing by comparison. Survival horror is quite a rote genre. You've got claustrophobic environments, you've got a relatively limited supply of health items and ammo, you've got monstrous enemies to fight, you've got artificially restrictive camera angles, you've got puzzles to solve that range from unusual to absurdly fucking ridiculous, and you've got a cast of characters who all seem happier by themselves. They show up now and then, chat to you a little bit about completely inconsequential things, and then go off somewhere even though the building or entire town is full of monsters. Silent Hill 2 quite slavishly adheres to the conventions of the genre, so expect all of those things, but it must be said that these conventions actually make much more sense in the Silent Hill world than in its peers. To understand how, you simply have to play the game. Although it's ostensibly a sequel, being Silent Hill 2, it has almost nothing to do with the original game. While this means newcomers don't have to worry about playing the original PlayStation exclusive game first, it also has the added benefit of veterans being able to experience a very fresh feeling story, which is as unusual as it is commendable in a sequel. That story is about a man called James Sunderland who's received a letter from his dead wife saying that she's waiting for him in the town of Silent Hill. Unsure what to make of this as he knows his wife has been dead for years, he travels to Silent Hill hoping to uncover the mystery behind the letter. Of course, he finds the town abandoned, fog hanging thick in the air, and monsters roaming the streets. The story is a dark, melancholic look at some very human concepts, but nothing can really be said of the story without spoiling it. Although slow to build momentum, it's easily one of the best computer game stories ever told, and it's the story that drives you onward as much as the gameplay, which is so rarely the case. But while the story is great, the dialogue kind of sucks. Like most other survival horror games, it's Japanese, and either something is lost in translation or the original dialogue's quite bad. Even taking the nature of the game and the Silent Hill series into consideration, which explains to an extent why much of the dialogue is vague or abstract, it's not so great. But what the game lacks literarily, it more than makes up for with its visual storytelling. Like the original, Silent Hill 2 uses a lot of symbolic imagery throughout the game. Most of the things you see in the game, be it the locations you visit, something as subtle as the way a character talks, or something as blatant as a monster's design, can and usually do all have deeper meanings that differ to the story being told. The first enemy you'll encounter, for instance, is an armless humanoid creature that spews some kind of vomit at you, and you can take it as, ooh, it's a scary monster that can vomit on me, isn't that scary? But on closer inspection, it appears not to be armless, but in a straitjacket of flesh. The question you then have to ask is, what does a straitjacket represent? What does vomit represent? Later on you'll find yourself against enemies that are two sets of mannequin legs connected at the hips. What does that mean, and how does it relate to the story? Why are the nurses in the hospital wearing such skimpy outfits, and how does that relate to the story? Almost everything has a deeper meaning, and it makes every single part of the entire game a much more thoughtful and intellectually stimulating experience, as you as a player become more than just an observer of that story, you become the interpreter. Now, great though it is, it's often very on the nose. It wants to be figured out, and it often doesn't try to hide that. You can always uncover more with serious analysis, but what does a straitjacket represent? Well, it's immediately obvious, but it still draws you into the story as you consider this imagery and figure out things the story doesn't tell you with words, or perhaps hasn't told you yet. And the game's atmosphere has a similar approach. That is to say, it's your brain that takes the brunt of it. The game is perpetually either misty, a nod to the King novella, or dark. When it's misty, you can see about 10 feet away from yourself in any direction. When it's dark, you can see about 5 feet directly ahead of yourself and literally nothing else most of the time. Sight is such a vital sense, particularly in games where the only senses we enjoy are sight and hearing, and the game taking it away from you makes you feel vulnerable on an instinctive level. And to this is added the fact that you can hear enemies long before you can see them, thanks to your static emitting radio-turned monster detector. And you find yourself in a position where you know enemies are out there, for you can hear them, but you can't see them, and your only option is to almost blindly march forward and face them. The very concept is contrary to your own deeply ingrained sense of self-preservation. Your fight or flight response is pulling you in both directions at the same time, and it just fucks with your head. And the restrictive camera angles, well, as cheap as it is, it's also very effective, and just one of the many ingredients in the stew of horror that your brain is relentlessly force-fed as you play through Silent Hill 2. And the music, it's perfect. I almost never use this word, so understand that this isn't casual hyperbole. The composer Akira Yamaoka is a genius. I don't even have the words to describe how his music makes me feel. It ranges from fairly traditional, solemn, lonely piano solos to what I think is some derivation of industrial music that I don't even know what it is, but whatever it is, the music in Silent Hill affects me on a deep, primal level in a way that no other component of any other horror game or film or anything ever has. Walking down a narrow, silent, pitch-black corridor, and suddenly hearing the static start to crackle as a distant enemy shambles towards you, then this music just starts playing. My instinctive reaction to that situation is to hit escape, spend a second composing myself, then to turn off my computer and collapse into a fetal position for a few hours. When everything in Silent Hill 2 comes together, as so often it does so perfectly. The problem is that if you can ride that sense of mad animal fear as far as it goes, it almost completely deflates when you actually get toe-to-toe with an enemy. In much the same way that a monstrous shadow can be cast by the most adorable little fluffy animals, and that sense of fear of the shadow is replaced by amusement of the thing casting it. Once you see the enemies in Silent Hill 2, they are no longer particularly frightening. They do, however, continue to chip away at your psyche, as there's something inherently revolting about the creature designs. They're all distinctly human, but they've been twisted into terrible forms, and they approach you with bizarre, disjointed gaits, appendages flailing at impossible angles. There's a perfect wrongness to them, and just watching them approaching you is mentally draining, but once you can see it, you can kill it, and killing things in Silent Hill 2 is very easy. Combat is definitely the weakest part of the game. You hold a button to draw your gun, you point yourself at the enemy that's probably slowly shuffling towards you, and you shoot it until it drops. If it's on the floor and your radio's still crackling, you go up to it and kick it until it bleeds out. That's really all there is to say about the combat. The enemies are all much slower than you, so in the large open areas of the town, which are pretty linear by the way, you can really just run right by them. Indoors, of course, you have nowhere to run, and then you're forced to ride that mad animal fear thing, or just quit the game and adopt a fetal position. When you're not interpreting mannequin legs, killing things, pooping your pants or wandering around town, you're solving puzzles. Most are of the collect X number of items and then arrange them in order as determined by a cryptic message variety, the staple of survival horror. But there is one puzzle toward the end of the game that is by far my favourite puzzle in any three-dimensional game. There are a bunch of hanged men, and you just have to decide which one you think is innocent and want to unhang, based on a fun little limerick. It's such a fantastic puzzle, and it comes at just the right time in the game, at a time when you'll probably be sick of the game's collecting and arranging puzzles. The puzzles on the whole are, like all other survival horror games, pretty bad and exist purely for pacing purposes. But again, as with many other vague and abstract elements of survival horror, the puzzles make a great deal more sense here due to the nature of the Silent Hill series. Silent Hill 2 doesn't tread new ground as far as gameplay mechanics go. It doesn't do anything the original Silent Hill didn't do, and for that matter it doesn't do anything the original Resident Evil didn't do. It's the potent psychological horror and a deeply intelligent story, and the fact that, and manner in which, these two elements are seamlessly interwoven that makes Silent Hill 2 such a special game. Its slow pace, melancholic atmosphere, and somewhat cryptic presentation make it a game for thinkers more than killers, so those looking to knife zombie sharks should look elsewhere, but those who want a magnificent story and amazing atmosphere should definitely try Silent Hill 2.